start then by having me
Okay.
ask you about the kind of evolution of your identity as a feminist. How did that all take place?
Okay, let's see. I think I date it primarily to my involvement in theological education. I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was involved in high school in the sort of at the margins of the civil rights movement, in that I was in a Catholic school and the school was integrated during my experiences of high school. But more importantly for me, I think that the Catholic Church took a position in that period of time to the Archbishop excommunicated political leaders who were Catholic who refused to integrate public schools. And that had a very strong impact on me as a child, not only because of what it was itself, but also because New Orleans is a relatively small city, and there were people who knew people who were involved in that process, so it had a kind of more personal set of connections. And I became more aware of my own privileges as a white in that environment and in that context. So although I had been raised very clearly with a sense of Christian charity and sort of do unto others and to be engaged in participating in teaching in hospitals or in engaging in acts of social service, I think the beginnings of my understanding of the civil rights movement began to politicize that in some way. I went to college in Virginia, and during that time I spent a year in France, 1968, which was an incredible experience because it was a period of enormous upheaval in the United States, but also in France in particular. There was a student strike, and it was connected to a workers' strike. And I was very involved with someone who was a political science PhD student who was very involved in those political movements. And it was, for me, my first introduction to socialism and to Marxism and to a structural analysis of poverty. So it kind of took a lot of my upbringing and my understanding of Christian charity, and it framed it in a much more political context. And during that period, I also traveled in Eastern Europe, was in the Soviet Union when they invaded Czechoslovakia, spent time in Turkey and in Iran, and had quite an extraordinary experience of seeing how other people saw the United States, and of beginning to understand myself as a United States citizen from the perspective of someone who lived outside of the United States, as much as perfect my French and enjoy sort of learning a second language and being engaged in the world through a second language. And I think all of that set a framework for when I returned to college and was a senior in college. A philosophy professor who I had invited a woman by the name of T. Grace Atkinson, who was a Southern feminist, a very radical feminist. And when she began her presentation at our college, she invited all the men to leave. And she was much more radical than I was at that time, and it was also quite extraordinary to me to have men introducing me to a radical feminist. I mean, it was the male philosophy professors at our university who organized this symposium on the women's movement and feminism, and I think I was, I don't know what the right word for it. Titillated is a little too sexual for it, but it was something that, on the one hand, attracted me, and on the other hand, felt a little bit politicized in a way that felt divisive to me, or felt like it was sort of separating me off from people I had been involved in political struggles with. Got involved in the anti-war movement when I came back to the United States, and that was very heterosexual, and I came to see quite heterosexist in many ways. But I was very mobilized by the presentation, very interested in it, and after finishing my bachelor's degree, I entered a theological studies program at Harvard, and I mean, there are lots of complex reasons as to why I chose that as the next step in my career, but I had seen religion and the church as a base of potential political transformation and change, as a sort of context for organizing.
Yeah.